What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my full review of the Motorola Moto G Play 2023, going over pretty much everything I can think of about it to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where we'll be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Play 2023, this is definitely more of an entry-level device, sort of taking the place of the Moto G Pure that came out a little bit over a year ago. With this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in general, for what it is, I do think the display on this phone is actually pretty good. Sure, it's not a fancy AMOLED type display with a 1080p resolution and all that, but for a phone you can get for less than $200, and for that matter, you can probably get it for free in a lot of cases. I do think things do look pretty good. The image is decently sharp, the colors and brightness are pretty nice, and at 6.5 inches, while not being the biggest display out there, it's definitely large enough to give you a pretty good experience no matter what you're doing. And with the 20:9 aspect ratio, we are getting a more tall and narrow form factor here. So if you're doing something in landscape mode like watching a video for example, you're going to get a nicer, more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like reading, browsing the web, scrolling through social media, stuff like that, with the taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit a decent amount of content on the screen without having to scroll as much. And with the 90Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother than usual, and while this isn't really going to make a huge difference, it will make the phone feel a bit more premium to use. So in general, again, yeah, I do think this phone does have a really good display for what it is. So if you are looking for a more entry-level device like this, and you are going to be on your phone a decent amount, so you want to make sure the display is at least good enough to get the job done, then for that, you're really not going to go wrong here. Now for storage, the Moto G Play 2023 is getting 32GB of internal storage, and of course, like pretty much every non-flagship phone, this phone does have microSD card expansion too. In general, at this point in 2023, even in a lower end device like this, I feel like for most people, 32GB is honestly pretty small. Sure, if you're a really light user and you're barely doing anything on your phone, maybe you have like 3 apps, and aside from that, just stuff like photos and videos and maybe music that you can easily offload to a microSD card anyway, then in that case, you might be okay. But again, I feel like for most people, that's probably not going to be the case. So if you do want any decent amount of apps, then keep in mind, the storage on this phone is going to fill up pretty quickly. Now, to give you an idea of what this looks like, right now, I really don't have a lot on this phone. I mean, just a couple social media apps, streaming platforms, search engine type tools, Amazon, a couple games here and there, but that's really just about it. So in general, compared to a lot of people I know, I'm really not the biggest power user. And even for me, as you can see right here, it's using about 80%. So even having just what I would consider like the bare minimum when it comes to apps, there's hardly any space left here. In fact, if we go into this, you can see the system itself is taking up almost 9GB. So yeah, in general, if you care at all about storage, I would definitely consider something that has a lot more than this, because overall in 2023, no matter what you're doing with your phone, I feel like 32GB is just really not going to be enough. But of course, that being said, to be fair, a phone like this having hardly any storage is really nothing new. So compared to other phones like it, it's not like it's unusual or anything. But just keep in mind, if you don't want to ever have to worry about storage, then an entry-level phone like this is probably not the best choice for you. Now for security features, with the Moto G Play 2023, this phone does have a fingerprint scanner right here in the back, but unfortunately there's no face unlock here. Now honestly, this is probably not that big a deal because for most people, a fingerprint scanner is most likely going to be perfectly fine anyway. But of course, if you do like face unlock, just keep in mind, this phone does not have that feature. But with that being said, let's go ahead and give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. For the camera setup here, with the Moto G Play 2023 up front, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 16 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, it's decent. Unfortunately, there's no ultra wide camera, which is kind of too bad at this point in 2023, but if you're really just looking for a phone that can take regular pictures and still come out nice and you don't really need anything crazy, then in that case, the camera setup we're getting here is going to be perfectly fine. And when it comes to photo quality, I would say for an entry-level phone, the camera here is actually pretty good. Sure, it's obviously not going to be super high-end studio quality or anything, but if you are looking for a more affordable device and you do like taking the occasional nice photo every now and then I do think for the most part, the Moto G Play will get the job done just fine. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Play 2023. And again, I would definitely say for what it is, the photo quality with this phone is actually really good. Now, of course, on one hand, if the camera is really a main focus for you, if you want to spend more money, then obviously you're gonna get a better camera then. But for the average user, if you really just need something decent that works, then again, I feel like no one's really gonna look at these photos and instantly assume it was taken with a bad camera. So in general, if you do want a decent camera and you do like taking nice photos every now and then, but the camera still isn't really a main focus for you, then in that case, I feel like this phone is really all you're gonna need. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Moto G Play 2023, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G37 processor. For overall performance, for light use, it is decent, but honestly, even for what it is, this is a pretty slow phone. So if you're going to be on your device a lot, then you will notice it's definitely not the fastest. But if you are more of a casual light user, which is honestly who this phone is actually made for anyway, then keep in mind while this phone is definitely not that fast or anything, it will at least get the job done. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these. And while I seriously doubt this phone is really going to be an upgrade for anyone, it'll at least give you an idea of where your current phone stands compared to this one. So that way, if you're really just looking to replace what you have and you don't really need any crazy performance or anything, you can at least make sure this phone isn't really a huge downgrade or anything. But in general, again, for more light use and super basic activities, which of course is what this phone is meant for, it will definitely get the job done. But if you are going to be on your phone a lot or you're doing more demanding activities, then you're definitely going to want to get something faster. For the battery, the Moto G Play 2023 has a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 10W fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. With a 5000 mAh battery, of course, seeing as that's pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, at least in the US, you can expect really good battery life and longevity. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still need to use your phone a lot, meaning of course you're going to need something with really good battery life, in that case, this phone is not going to let you down. And in addition to this, aside from having really good life per charge, down the road as the battery degrades, compared to a much smaller battery, it's still going to last for quite a bit longer. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time without having to replace it, getting a phone like this with such a good battery is definitely a good idea. Now, when it comes to charging speeds, sure, on one hand, 10W fast charging, is that even fast charging? Definitely not very impressive on paper, but in reality, when I'm actually using this phone, at least for me, charging speeds do seem to be perfectly fine. I mean, if you have one of those crazy fast car chargers and you want something to charge really fast, then honestly, there's really not going to be a phone like that in this price range. But for the average user, when you're just casually charging your phone, sure, the charging speeds are definitely not the best, but again, in my experience, I haven't personally had any issues. Now, as far as the software goes, as of the recording of this video, the Moto G Play 2023 does currently have Android 12, which honestly, in my opinion, is kind of too bad because, as you can tell by the name, this is a 2023 phone, and we are on Android 13 right now. So you would think that a new phone being released in 2023 would at least have the latest version of Android, but unfortunately, that's just not the case. In fact, at this point, the only phones in this price range I know of that currently have Android 13, again, as of this recording, I'm sure this is going to change real soon, are Samsung Galaxy A series phones. So honestly, if you want the latest version of Android, I would probably just go with the Samsung. But considering that no other phone besides those has Android 13, seeing that this phone has Android 12 while still being kind of disappointing is definitely not unusual. That being said though, keep in mind, judging by what happened with the Moto G Pure, which again is really similar to this phone, I'm pretty sure the Moto G Play is at least going to get Android 13 eventually, but I have no idea when that's going to happen. So again, if you are really concerned about the software, I would probably skip this phone. But if you're not really that worried and you're just after something decently newer that gets the job done, the Moto G Play is still going to be perfectly fine. Another thing I do want to point out here is that unfortunately, the Moto G Play doesn't have NFC, so a little disappointing there, but honestly, not very many phones in this price range do have NFC at this point. Going into 2023, I was kind of hoping NFC would be more of a standard feature, but we're not quite there yet. And while there are a couple really inexpensive phones that do have NFC, most sub $200 phones still don't. So if you do like to use tap and pay, then you might not want to get this phone. Now, taking a look at the overall design, for what it is, I definitely think this phone looks pretty nice. Sure, it doesn't look that different from a generic entry-level phone, but I really do like this hole punch design on the camera here. And although it doesn't have super thin bezels, the phone in general does look pretty sleek and modern. So yeah, again, when it comes to the design, I really don't have any complaints. For the materials, they do feel pretty nice. And while, of course, I feel like nobody cares about having premium materials since most people probably use a case anyway, I can definitely appreciate good build quality, which this phone definitely does have. The buttons are pretty solid. The phone, for what it is, has a decent amount of weight to it, and it definitely doesn't feel like it's about to fall apart or anything. So yeah, when it comes to the design and materials, I do think the Moto G Play is pretty good. But in conclusion, my general thoughts about the Motorola Moto G Play 2023. Overall, for what it is, I definitely don't think it's a bad phone, but honestly, there's really nothing special about it. When it comes to things like the display, for example, the display is pretty much exactly the same as every other phone in this price range. The 90Hz refresh rate might give it a slight edge, but even that is pretty common nowadays. The storage is definitely a huge drawback, albeit it's not really uncommon or anything either. The performance is also a little disappointing, although again, for the more basic use it's meant for, it's still going to be at least good enough. But in general, yeah, at the end of the day, the Moto G Play 2023 is really just a kind of generic entry-level phone. Two things I really do like about it are that first of all, it does have a really good battery with a 5000 mAh battery. While it's not really uncommon per se, the battery life definitely is impressive here. So if that is important to you, then you really are going to like that about this phone. And then again, the camera for what it is really good. Sure, it's not the best camera ever, but not every entry-level phone has a camera this good. So if you are looking for a really affordable, kind of basic phone, but you do want to take some nice pictures from time to time, then for that, this phone definitely will get the job done. But again, overall, my general conclusion here is that with the Moto G Play 2023, while not being a bad phone, it's easily interchangeable with countless others. But of course, if you are looking for a really affordable device that can get the basics done, you don't need any fancy features, and maybe you want a good camera and a good battery, then for that, the Moto G Play 2023 is going to be a perfectly fine choice. But this concludes my review of the Motorola Moto G Play 2023. Again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.